Welcome back to the deep dive. I want to start today by putting you in a specific headspace. It's 2:00 a.m. You can't sleep. You're in a hotel room, maybe somewhere in the Midwest, and the only light in the room is the blue glow of the television. You start flipping channels.
I know exactly where you're going with this.
You go past the infomercials for nonstick pans, past the reruns of sitcoms from the 90s, and then you land on something.
Yeah, there's always something on.
There's a guy. He's usually standing on a stage that looks like it cost more than my house. He's wearing a suit that shines under the studio lights. He's holding a microphone, maybe wiping sweat from his forehead. And he is passionately, intensely asking you for something.
Usually money.
Usually money, often in exchange for a miracle.
The classic American archetype. It's almost a piece of folklore at this point.
Exactly. We are talking about televangelism, and I think for most of us, it's a punchline. It's the caricature of the greedy preacher or, the Sunday morning channel surfing hazard. But when we actually looked at the stack of research for this episode, I was honestly floored by the sheer scale of this machine.
It's massive. And it's not just about the caricature, not really. This is a story about the evolution of media technology itself. It is about how religion adapted, or I guess mutated, depending on your view, to fit every new screen that entered our lives.
From crackly AM radios to
global satellite empires. It's a huge leap.
So that is our mission today. We're going to trace this lineage. We need to figure out how we got from, street corners to private jets. And we are going to unpack the controversies, the theology, the massive financial questions, and the investigations that try to crack the code of these organizations.
And we have to talk about the why. Why did this happen here? Why is it such a uniquely American export? Because it really, really is.
Right. But before we get to the jets and the scandals, let's settle on the word itself. Televangelism. It sounds so natural now, but it's a weird word, isn't it? It feels like a corporate buzzword from the 80s.
It does, but it's actually a portmanteau, which is a fancy way of saying it's just television and evangelism smashed together. But the history of the word is surprisingly twisty. You'd assume it was a term coined by journalists to mock these guys, right?
That would be my guess. It sounds like a critique. Oh, look at that televangelist.
But the first recorded use was actually by the church itself. In 1958, the Southern Baptist Convention used it as the title for a television miniseries. They were trying to brand this new method of reaching people.
Wait. So the Baptists invented the term, they coined it themselves?
Effectively, yes. They were proud of it. But it didn't catch on immediately. It took a while. It wasn't until around 1981 when two sociologists, Jeffrey Haddon and Charles Swan, published a book called Primetime Preachers that the term televangelist really entered the popular lexicon.
Primetime Preachers. That sounds like a heavy metal album.
It absolutely does. But here is the curveball that I think really contradicts the stereotype we all have. When you picture a televangelist, who do you see?
I see a Southern guy, probably Baptist or Pentecostal, high energy, maybe some big hair depending on the decade.
Right. That is the image. But Time magazine actually used the term televangelist way back in 1952.
52?
And they weren't talking about a Baptist. They were describing a Roman Catholic bishop named Fulton Sheen.
No way! A Catholic bishop, the full robes and everything.
A Catholic bishop in full regalia. We will get to him later because he is a fascinating character. But it just goes to show that this phenomenon didn't start in the way most people think. It's much broader.
That is a great reminder. We have these mental shortcuts, but the history is always messier. Also, the research mentions other terms like radio evangelism or teleministry. I guess the umbrella term is just using media to market religion.
Precisely. It is the utilization of mass media platforms for the marketing of religious messages. And I use the word marketing deliberately because at a certain point, that's what it becomes.
Okay, let's address the geography. Because I've traveled a bit, and while you see religion everywhere, this specific flavor, the independent broadcaster buying airtime to solicit donations, feels deeply American. Is that just my bias?
It is not bias at all. It is structural.
Yeah.
The roots of televangelism are uniquely American because of two very specific factors. The first is our media environment.
You mean the fact that we watch too much TV?
Well, there's that too. But specifically, the regulation of TV. In the U.S., the media landscape has historically been largely deregulated compared to, say, Europe. Here, airtime is a commodity. If you have the funds, you can buy the slot.
It doesn't matter who you are.
It doesn't matter if you're selling soap, cars, or salvation. The network just wants the check to clear.
Right. Whereas if I go to the UK...
In the UK, or many other nations, broadcasting was historically treated as a public service. It was heavily regulated, religious programming existed, but it was usually a requirement placed on the broadcasters by the government. So the BBC might film a nice, quiet service at a local parish.
Right, it's a documentary approach. Here's what the church is doing. It's not an appeal.
Exactly. It wasn't a private interest group buying an hour of prime time to fundraise.
Yeah.
That is a crucial distinction. In America, the pulpit was for sale to the highest bidder.
And the second factor, you said there were two.
Demographics. You simply had a massive Christian population that was accustomed to giving money to the church. The tradition of tithing was already deeply ingrained. You combine a willingness to donate with an open market for airtime, and you create an industry.
It's the perfect storm. Okay, so let's get into the time machine. Because you made a point in the pre-show notes that this didn't start with the television. It started way before the screen.
Oh, absolutely. If you want to understand the DNA of televangelism, you have to look at the wireless pulpit. We have to go back to the 1920s.
The radio era. The roaring 20s.
The radio era. And to understand the motivation, you have to look at the theology. Christianity has this built-in imperative called the Great Commission.
Go ye into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature.
Exactly. It's a command to spread the message. So for 2,000 years, Christians have been early adopters of whatever technology helps them do that. The apostles used Roman roads and ships. The reformers used the printing press. And then in the 20th century, you get the vacuum tube. You get radio.
I try to imagine what that must have felt like. For a preacher in 1920, speaking to 500 people was a huge crowd. Suddenly, you turn on this box and you can speak to how many?
Millions. It was a paradigm shift. It was as big a leap as the printing press was from hand copying manuscripts. Radio allowed them to bypass physical barriers. It was low cost, and it could penetrate borders where missionaries were literally banned.
So who was the first? Who is the pioneer of radio preaching?
There were a few pioneers, but S. Parks Cadman is a name you need to know. He started broadcasting in 1923.
1923. That is right at the birth of commercial radio. I mean, the first commercial station, KDKA, was only in 1920, so they were right there at the beginning.
They were on the ground floor. By 1928, he had a weekly Sunday afternoon broadcast on the NBC radio network. Now, I want you to guess the audience size.
1928. Radios were still kind of a luxury, right? Maybe a couple 100,000. A million if you're being generous.
5 million.
5 million people in 1928. Are you serious?
5 million listeners tuning in every Sunday.
That is staggering. If you adjust for population growth, that's like a Super Bowl audience every single week for a sermon.
It really is. And it wasn't just individual preachers. Churches realized this power immediately. In that same year, 1923, the Calvary Baptist Church in New York City became the first church to operate its own radio station.
Not just buy time, but own the station, the whole infrastructure.
Own the infrastructure.
Yeah.
And talk about staying power. They're still around. They still produce a show called Tell It from Calvary. That is a century of continuous broadcasting.
That is wild. But radio also gave us the first celebrity preachers, right? The personalities. Because it's not a visual medium, your voice is everything.
Absolutely. The medium rewards personality. You have to mention Semple McPherson.
Oh, she is a legend, a total force of nature.
She was. She was a tent revivalist, which is exactly what it sounds like, traveling from town to town, preaching in massive canvas tents. But she realized that radio could take that energy and broadcast it nationwide. She could put the tent revival in your living room.
She wasn't just reading a sermon, though. She was performing. There were sound effects, characters.
She was a pioneer of the format. She built one of the earliest Pentecostal megachurches based on her radio fame. She understood that to hold an audience on the radio, you had to be engaging. You had to have drama. She gained a nationwide notoriety in the 20s and 30s because she made faith sound exciting.
But there was a darker side to this early radio era, too. It wasn't all revival and hymns. The same tool could be used for other purposes.
No, not at all. We have to talk about Father Charles Coughlin. He was a Catholic priest in the 1930s.
I remember this from history class. The radio priest.
Yes. And he started out fairly standard, talking about Scripture, but he moved into very dark political territory. He used his massive platform to broadcast virulent anti-communist and eventually strongly anti-Semitic rhetoric.
And people listened.
Millions listened. His audience was estimated at up to 30 million at its peak. It showed the danger of the medium. When you have a charismatic leader and a microphone and no one to fact-check you in real time, you can mobilize a massive amount of hate just as easily as you can mobilize love.
It's a direct, unfiltered line into people's homes.
Exactly. By 1946, Time magazine estimated there were 10 million regular listeners for radio ministers in the U.S. the industry was established.
And the engagement, I mean, people weren't just passively listening while doing the dishes, they were writing in. The mail was a huge part of this.
The mail volume is the key metric here. This is where we see the business model forming. It's not just about preaching, it's about building a database, a mailing list.
A pre-digital CRM.
That's a great way to put it. Reverend Ralph Sockman was getting 4,000 letters a week.
4,000 letters. Imagine the logistics of that. The paper cuts alone.
And Archbishop Fulton Sheen, who we mentioned earlier, was receiving between 3,000 and 6,000 letters weekly. Think about what that requires. You need a staff. You need a warehouse. You need a system to open, read, and crucially process the donations inside those envelopes.
That is the birth of the direct mail fundraising machine right there. The whole send us $1 and we'll send you this prayer cloth model.
It is. And this industrial scale led to the formation of the National Religious Broadcasters, the NRB, in 1944. They realized they needed a trade association, a lobbying group, to protect their interests and manage this growing industry.
So radio proves the concept. It proves you can build a national audience, you can raise millions through the mail. But then the 1950s roll around. The technology shifts. We get the picture.
The shift to the screen. TV had been around experimentally in the 30s, but the 50s is when it took over the American living room. It's the new shiny thing. And religious broadcasters were right there waiting.
And we are back to Fulton Sheen, the bishop.
The man Time called the first televangelist. He successfully made the jump from radio to TV in 1951 with his show Life is Worth Living. And this is really important. He wasn't on some backwater station. He was on prime time. He was competing with Milton Berle.
And winning, right. I read he was a huge star.
He won numerous Emmy Awards. His show ran until the late 60s. He had this intense hypnotic gaze. He would just stand there in front of a blackboard, no fancy set, and talk. He'd look right into the camera, and people felt like he was looking into their souls.
He proved that religion could be entertainment.
Compelling television. That was the breakthrough.
And then, of course, the 50s gave us the biggest name of them all. You can't talk about this subject without him, Billy Graham.
You can't tell this story without Billy Graham. But what's so interesting is that he didn't just preach on TV. He understood multimedia in a way that was decades ahead of his time. In 1951, he founded Worldwide Pictures.
A movie studio. A real movie studio.
Basically. He was producing feature films with Christian themes to be shown in churches and on TV. He was creating content. His televised crusades from stadiums around the world became must-see TV events for millions of people. He understood spectacle.
And at the same time, we see the format of the televised church service starting to take shape. Not just a sermon, but the whole show.
Right. Rex Humbard is the key figure there. In 1952, he became the first to broadcast a weekly church service. And get this, he literally built his church, the Cathedral of Tomorrow in Ohio, as a TV studio first and a church second.
Wait, what do you mean?
The seats were arranged in a semicircle for the best camera angles. The lighting was studio lighting. The pulpit was a stage. The people in the pews were, in a way, part of the set for the much larger audience at home.
That is a huge psychological shift. The people in the room are props for the people who aren't there.
In a way, yes. And it worked.
Yeah.
By 1980, Rex Humbard's program was on 695 stations in 91 languages.
91 languages. That is the internet before the internet.
It is global domination via satellite. Another pioneer from that era was Oral Roberts. By 1957, his broadcast reached 80% of the possible TV audience in America. He perfected the faith-healing format for television.
And then the model evolved again. It wasn't enough to just buy time on a channel. The real power was in owning the channel.
Bingo. Enter Pat Robertson.
Founder of CBN.
Pat Robertson founded the Christian Broadcasting Network, CBN, in 1961. This was the first Christian television network in the United States. He bought a defunct UHF station in Virginia and built an empire from it.
And this is where the 700 Club comes from. I feel like that show has been on forever.
It's one of the longest-running programs in television history, and the name itself is a fundraising reference. He needed 700 partners to donate $10 a month to keep the station on the air in the early days.
That's the mechanic again. The content exists to drive the donation, which funds the content. It's a perpetual motion machine.
And the reach is staggering. As of 2016, CBN was broadcasting in 39 languages across 138 countries. This era, the 60s and 70s, is when TV fully replaced radio as the primary medium. This is the golden age of the names everyone knows. Jimmy Swaggart, Jim and Tammy Faye Baker, Jerry Falwell.
The Bakers and the PTL Club, that was a whole cultural moment in itself.
It was a phenomenon. They created a Christian version of The Tonight Show. with celebrity guests, music, and Tammy Faye's very emotional, very famous makeup. They built a theme park. It's a complete media ecosystem.
And we also have to mention the Trinity Broadcasting Network, TBN.
Founded by Paul and Jan Crouch, it's now the world's largest religious television network. They took Robertson's model and just scaled it up to an incredible degree, with their own satellite network covering the globe.
So that brings us to the modern era, the 21st century. The hair is a little less big, maybe, but the model seems the same.
The aesthetic is updated for sure. Now, in the U.S., we have figures like Joel Osteen at Lakewood Church, Joyce Meyer, T.D. Jakes.
Joel Osteen is interesting because he doesn't really do the fire and brimstone thing. He's very motivational speaker. It's a much softer sell.
That's the modern evolution. The message has shifted to be more about positive thinking and personal success, but the structure is the megachurch pastor. They have a massive physical church. Lakewood is an old basketball arena, but the majority of their congregation is watching remotely on television or online.
Now, before we get into the heavy controversy, I want to pivot to something I didn't expect. We think of this as an American thing, but the source material says the fruit of this is now global.
It is. The roots are American, but the model has been exported perfectly. The technology, satellite TV, the internet made it possible to replicate this anywhere. And Nigeria, for instance, is a massive hub for this now.
Who are the big names there?
You have figures like Enoch Attaboy and Chris Ayakolome. They are superstars. They fill stadiums that make American megachurches look like chapels. And they use the same satellite and internet strategies, often with even more spectacular claims of miracles and healings.
And it's not just Protestants, right? The model works for anyone.
No. In Uruguay, the national Channel 4 has been airing the Catholic Mass since 1961. So the medium has been adopted across the board by different denominations and in different cultural contexts.
Okay, we have the history, we have the reach, we see how it evolved from a guy at a microphone to these global media corporations. Now, we have to talk about the money and the theology that drives the money, because you can't separate the two in this world.
No, you can't. They are completely intertwined, and this is where the friction really starts.
Let's talk about the prosperity gospel. I feel like I know what it means, but can you define it properly for us?
Sure. The prosperity gospel, sometimes called the health and wealth gospel or seed faith, is a theological belief that faith, positive speech, and, most importantly, donations to religious causes will increase one's own material wealth and physical health.
So God wants you to be rich, and if you give me $100, God will give you $1,000 back.
That is the essential pitch. It's not just that God wants you to be rich, but that if you aren't rich or if you are sick, it might be a sign of a lack of faith, or, crucially, a lack of sowing.
Sowing meaning giving money to the preacher.
Exactly. The metaphor is a seed. You give a seed offering, and God will grow that into a financial harvest for you. It turns faith into a transaction, an investment.
And I can see why critics hate this. It seems so transactional.
The criticism is fierce. Secular critics obviously see it as a scam, a way to prey on the desperate. But the harshest criticism often comes from other Christians.
Right, because traditional Christianity is usually about, blessed are the poor. It's about humility and suffering.
Exactly. Critics point to the story of Jesus and the rich young ruler, where Jesus tells the man to sell all his possessions and give the money to the poor. The prosperity gospel completely flips that on its head. It says acquiring possessions is a sign of God's favor.
I have a quote here from John MacArthur. He is a very prominent, very conservative pastor. This is from 2009, and he's talking about prosperity preachers.
Okay, let's hear it.
He calls them shameless frauds, greedy imposters, charlatans, and enemies of everything holy.
He is not holding back.
Enemies of everything holy. That is serious beef. That's not just a theological disagreement.
It is. And there are watchdogs like Ole Anthony from the Trinity Foundation who spend decades digging through televangelist trash, literally, to find evidence of them faking miracles and living these incredibly lavish lifestyles.
And that leads us to the lifestyle, because if you are preaching that God wants everyone to be rich, you better look the part, right? That's the justification.
That is the justification. They argue that their wealth is proof that their message works. Oh, look at my mansion. God bless me. He can bless you too if you just have enough faith and send in a donation.
But the opacity of the finances is the real issue. We don't actually know how much money they have or where it goes.
Right. And this is a key point about U.S. law. Religious organizations are tax exempt. But unlike other nonprofits like the Red Cross or a university, churches do not have to file a Form 990 with the IRS. They don't have to show the public their books.
So it's a complete black box.
It's a total black box.
Yeah.
There is an organization called the Evangelical Council for Financial Accountability, the ECFA. It's a voluntary group that churches can join to commit to financial transparency.
So it's sort of good housekeeping seal of approval for church finances.
A great analogy. And do the big-name televangelists join? A 2003 survey by the St. Louis Post-Dispatch looked at 17 major televangelists. Only one belonged to the ECFA.
1 out of 17.
That tells you everything you need to know about their desire for scrutiny. They operate as independent fiefdoms. They aren't answering to a bishop or a board of elders in the traditional sense. They are the top of their own pyramid.
And this lack of oversight leads to the stories we always hear. The gold faucets, the fleets of cars.
Private jets. The jets are always the headline.
Always. Jesus didn't have a private jet.
And look, they have a defense for that. They say, I need a jet to travel efficiently to spread the gospel around the world. But when you have fleets of Rolls-Royces or palatial estates listed as parsonages, it becomes very hard to justify that as a ministry expense.
And this high-flying lifestyle requires a constant, massive influx of cash.
That is the trap. High production values, satellite time, and jet fuel are incredibly expensive. So the fundraising has to be relentless and aggressive. They have to sell the miracle water, the prayer shawls, the DVDs. They have to keep the donor list churning.
This brings us to the most dramatic attempt to rein this in, the Senate probe.
The Grassley investigation. This is a pivotal moment in the history of televangelism.
Set it stage. It's 2007.
It's 2007. Senator Chuck Grassley, a Republican from Iowa and the ranking member of the Senate Finance Committee, launches an investigation. Now, this is significant because Grassley is a conservative. This wasn't a liberal attack on religion. This was a fiscal conservative looking at potential tax abuse.
And he targeted 6 specific ministries, the Grassley 6.
Yes. The list reads like a who's who of the prosperity gospel at the
Very
time.
proud.
You had Kenneth and Gloria Copeland in Texas, Creflo and Taffy Dollar in Georgia.
Creflo Dollar is quite a name.
It is. Then there was Benny Hinn, also in Texas, Eddie L. Long in Georgia, Joyce and David Meyer in Missouri, and Randy and Paula White in Florida.
These are the heavy hitters, the biggest names in the game.
They are. And Grassley's questions were not about theology. He didn't care what they preached. He cared about the assets. He had reports of fleets of Rolls-Royces, multi-million-dollar homes, personal use of ministry-owned jets, and very questionable credit card spending, all funded by tax-exempt donations.
There was a specific detail about a bathroom fixture, wasn't there? That got a lot of press.
There were reports of a ministry paying for a $23,000 marble commode for a bishop's mansion.
A $23,000 toilet.
Allegedly. And these are the kinds of details that get the public's attention and eventually a senator's attention.
And Eddie Long, there was another layer of controversy there, too, beyond just the finances.
Yes. The source notes that a 2011 docuseries episode focused on Bishop Long's alleged sexual misconduct, which was a separate and very serious scandal that unfolded around the same time. So for some of these figures, the financial issues were just the tip of the iceberg.
So Grassley sends these letters. He demands their financial records. What did they do? Did they open the books?
Most of them said no, flat out.
They just said no to the United States Senate.
Effectively. They hired high-powered lawyers and argued that the inquiry violated their First Amendment religious freedom. They claimed it was government entanglement with religion and that the government has no right to inspect the internal finances of a church.
That is a bold strategy. You can't audit us because we're a church.
It was a standoff. To be fair, Joyce Meyer and Benny Hinn did cooperate to some extent, providing some records and making changes to their governance. But others, like Kenneth Copeland, basically stonewalled the committee and were very defiant about it.
So how did it end? Did people go to jail? Were there massive fines?
No. The final report was released in January 2011. And honestly, it was a bit of a dud in terms of enforcement. It was more of a summary of what they found, which was very little because most didn't cooperate.
Really? After all that, all the headlines?
Grassley essentially threw his hands up. He called for further congressional review of tax exemption laws for religious groups. But he realized that legally, the wall of separation between church and state is so high in the U.S. that it is incredibly difficult for the IRS to audit a church without looking like they are persecuting religion.
So the jets kept flying.
The jets kept flying. The laws didn't change.
That is frustrating. But I guess it highlights how uniquely protected religious institutions are in America, for better or for worse.
It is the double-edged sword of freedom of religion. It protects the little neighborhood church, but it also protects the guy with the $23,000 toilet.
Now, money isn't the only place where these guys flex their muscles. We have to talk about politics.
Oh, yes. The intersection of televangelism and the ballot box is huge and has shaped American politics for the last 40 years.
We've seen this for decades. Pat Robertson ran for president.
He did in 1988 and did surprisingly well in the early primaries. And Jerry Falwell founded the Moral Majority in the late 70s, which was instrumental in electing Ronald Reagan. These televangelists became kingmakers. They could mobilize millions of voters, their donors, their viewers, to support specific candidates.
Usually conservative candidates.
Historically, yes. The source material also mentions John Hagee, who is very active politically, particularly regarding support for Israel. They can get on television and frame a political election in stark moral terms.
But wait, if they are tax-exempt 501c3 organizations, aren't they supposed to stay out of politics?
Technically, yes. There is a law called the Johnson Amendment, passed back in 1954.
Explain that to me. What does it do?
The Johnson Amendment bans 501c3 organizations, which includes all charities and churches, from explicitly endorsing or opposing candidates for political office. If you do, you're supposed to lose your tax-exempt status.
But I feel like I see pastors endorsing candidates all the time on TV. They might not say, I endorse so-and-so, but it's pretty obvious.
You do, and this is the controversy. Critics argue that when a televangelist uses donor-paid airtime to tell people to vote for candidate X or to attack candidate Y, they are breaking the law. But they use coded language, or they endorse a platform rather than a person.
Has anyone actually lost their tax-exempt status over this?
Almost never. The IRS is terrified of enforcing it because it inevitably leads to a massive political fight and accusations of targeting religion. So the law exists, but it's rarely used. It's a paper tiger.
It seems like televangelists operate in this special gray zone where regular rules, financial transparency, political neutrality just don't apply.
That is a very accurate assessment of the situation.
Now we're coming into the final stretch of the deep dive, and I want to pivot to something that I think will surprise a lot of people. We spent most of our time talking about Christians. But the source material highlights that this is not just a Christian phenomenon anymore.
No, the medium of television is neutral. The model works for anyone with a message and a means to broadcast it. And we are seeing a significant rise in Islamic televangelism.
This makes perfect sense if you think about it. If the goal is to spread the faith, why wouldn't you use the most powerful communication tools available?
Exactly. In Islam, there is a concept called dawah.
Dawah. How do you spell that?
D-A-W-A-H. It effectively means inviting people to Islam. It's the Islamic equivalent of evangelism. Traditionally, a da'i caller might speak in a mosque or a public square. But now, they have satellite channels and YouTube.
Who are the stars of this world?
The source lists a few key figures. You've got Moez Masoud, who is Egyptian, Zakir Naik from India, Amr Khalid, another Egyptian.
And do they copy the American style, the production values, the format?
They draw clear inspiration from it. Moez Masoud, for example, has been described as having a very modern, approachable style, not unlike a younger Western preacher. But Zakir Naik is perhaps the most famous and controversial example. His whole thing is massive public debates where he quotes scripture from memory.
And just like the Christians, they have their own networks.
Yes, Muslim Television Ahmadiyya, the Islam Channel, ARY-QTV, and Peace TV, which was founded by Zakir Naik. These are major global broadcasters reaching millions of homes.
You mentioned controversy with Zakir Naik and Peace TV. Is it the same kind of stuff? Financial questions, private jets?
It's financial, but it also goes into much deeper political and social territory. And what's interesting is that regulators in other countries have come down much harder on them than U.S. regulators ever have on American preachers.
For example?
In the UK, the regulator Ofcom has censured the Islam Channel and Peace TV multiple times.
What for?
Things like biased political coverage, sure, but also much darker things. The source material mentions broadcasts that were homophobic, and what Ofcom deemed incitement to illegal acts, specifically including justification for marital rape and murder.
Wow, that is intense. That's way beyond a fancy toilet.
It is. Peace TV is actually banned in India, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka because of government concerns that its programming promotes extremism and religious intolerance.
So, while the American televangelists get investigated for money, these figures are getting banned from entire countries for concerns about radicalization.
Although the financial critique is there too, critics argue that some Islamic televangelists are also building personal wealth and empires, capitalizing on the devotion of their followers. The dynamic of charismatic leader plus mass media plus donations equals power and wealth seems to be a universal one.
It's the medium, isn't it? TV demands a star. Stars get power, and that power can be abused in different ways depending on the context.
It creates a structure that rewards performance over substance, regardless of the holy book you are holding.
So let's try to synthesize all of this. We've gone from S. Parks Cadman's crackly radio mic in 1923 to these 24-hour global satellite networks broadcasting in dozens of languages.
It's been a century of explosive technology-driven growth.
On one hand, you have to admit, they did it. They fulfilled the Great Commission in a way the apostles could never have dreamed of. They got the message to every corner of the earth.
Technically, yes. The reach is undeniable. You can't argue with the numbers.
But the cost. The commercialization, the scandals, the political entanglement, the materialism. It feels like the medium warped the message.
That is the core tension of this entire story. The tool that allows you to reach the world also tempts you to sell out to the world. The constant need for money to feed the machine can end up corrupting the mission the machine was built for.
I want to leave our listeners with one final thought, something I found in the notes that really stuck with me.
This is the echo chamber point.
Right. Televangelists always claim they are saving souls. We reached 1 billion people, so many new converts. But some of the research suggests that religious broadcasting is primarily viewed by existing Christians.
They are preaching to the choir, or more accurately, selling to the choir.
Exactly. If you aren't a believer, you probably aren't watching TBN at 2 a.m., you're watching Netflix or a sports replay.
That is the reality of a fragmented media landscape.
So here's the question for you to think about. If the medium wins very few new converts and is mostly consumed by people who already believe, then does this massive multi-billion-dollar financial engine really serve the faith, or does it just serve the broadcaster?
That is the multi-million-dollar question, isn't it? Is it a mission, or is it just a very expensive subscription service for validation?
Something to chew on. Thanks for listening to The Deep Dive. We'll see you next time.